So thank you very much, Oli and Marcel, for this introduction. Thank you all. And thank you for the invitation to be here to talking about the seasonal and the interannual variability of the CO2 fluxes in the Northern Antarctic Peninsula. So I'm going to focus on the main two studies by our groups that was developed during my master's degree and my PhD. And I will be to highlight some gaps in the CO2 flux studies in the polar regions, such as the Northern Antarctic Peninsula. I'm sorry, okay, I'm just put the pointer here. Okay. So I'm going to focus on the Galaxy Strait. The Galaxy Strait lies in the southern end of the Northern Antarctic Peninsula. It's this region here, highlighted by this blue rectangle in this figure on the left. And why the Galaxy Strait is so important for us to care about and to study the CO2 fluxes is because this is a very important region to the biogeochemical processes. And one of the reasons is because of the high chlorophyll A that have been recorded in this region. Several studies such as this here, we can see the chlorophyll A in the figure on the top, where we can see high concentration of chlorophyll A, in this case, as much as more than 40 milligram per cubic meters. And these high chlorophyll A indicate the high productivity that underpins the high diversity and the high productivity food web in different levels. And another important aspect here in the Galaxy Strait is that this region is one of the most impacted region along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula by the intrusions of the CDW, the circumpolar deep water. So in this figure here, the intrusions of the circumpolar deep water is represented by these arrows in orange. So we have influence of the circumpolar deep water intrusions in the southern end of the Galaxy Strait, in the middle, the Scholar Channel, and in the northern part as well. And because of the shallow bathymetry, we have a lot of the upwells of the CDW to the sea surface. This is very important because the CDW is a world water mass with the high concentrations of the remineralized carbon. And so the intrusions in the upwells of the CDW drives the increase of the PCO2, for example, the partial pressure of the CO2. So all of these processes make the Galaxy Strait an important region to study the CO2 fluxes. And I actually started to study the Galaxy Strait for the CO2 fluxes aspect because of this study in 2002 led by Marta Alvarez. And they investigated the CO2 fluxes in the 90s in the Galaxy Strait during the summer, and they described the behavior of the CO2 sink in this region. That means that the surface ocean is taking up CO2 from the atmosphere. And about 20 years later, during the summer as well, in the same region, the Rodrigo Kerr and others collaborators describes the behavior of the CO2 source, a completely different behavior in the same region during the summer as well. The explanation of this change in the behavior was because the different conditions of the oceans in terms of the biology and the physical aspects. For example, in the 90s, the main phytoplankton group was dominated by the diatoms, and diatoms is very known to be very efficient in taking up CO2 from the sea surface, so reducing the partial pressure of the CO2 and lead to the CO2 sink. But in 2015, when the study by Rodrigo Quer was carried out, the main phytoplankton group was composed by the cryptophytes, and cryptophyte is known to be less efficient to taking up CO2 from the sea surface compared to the diatoms. So this difference in the main phytoplankton group maybe is one of the explanations for this different behavior. And another important aspect was the intense positive sum index identified this year, and the positive sum index indicate the more intrusions of the CDW into the along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula as a whole, but definitely more in the Galaxy Strait. So because of these two different conditions, this behavior of the CO2 source was identified in these different years. So the explanation is good, fair enough, but at that time, we were wondering what happened between these 2 years, between the 1996 and then 2015, and if this region changed the behavior in terms of the CO2 fluxes, or if there is an interannual variability in these 2 years kept the signal of this interannual variability. And this was what I look at during my master degree. In this figure here, we have quite a summarize of this, what we found out in this paper published in the Progress in Oceanography into 2020. So in this figure here, we have the interannual, the time series of the CO2 fluxes from the 1999 to the 2017. In the y-axis, we have the CO2 fluxes in millimole per square meter per day. And just to remind everyone here, the negative values indicate the CO2 sink. That means that the sea surface ocean taking up CO2 from the atmosphere. And what we identified were that there is a huge interannual variability in the CO2 fluxes. There is many colors here, but I just want you to bring attention to the red colors. That is the red line. That is the CO2 flux is calculated by the Vanikoff 2014 parameterization. That was all of this discussion relies on. So we can see very clear here, huge interannual variability, and we identified that actually this region swim from a condition of strong CO2 sink and a near equilibrium condition. So we have years such as this here, this here, this here, that there is a strong CO2 uptake from the atmosphere, and there is here where the concentration of CO2 at this surface is quite yet in equilibrium with the atmospheric CO2. Well, we identified 2 cycles of variability with the 2 years and 4 years periodicity, and most of the time series is involved in 2 and 4 years periodicities, as we can see here. But we actually don't know very well why, what is the main explanation of this interannual variability. We do believe, and we discussed about this, that probably is because of the intrusions of the CDW in some years, because these 4 years of periodicity is quite similar to the periodicities of the sun. And when we have a strong positive sun, we have more CDW intrusions, and we have a higher concentration of dissolved inorganic carbon to the sea surface, and therefore we have a near equilibrium condition. And we don't have the sun positive or strong positive sun or even negative sun index. We have the strong, probably strong CO2 sink. Well, all of this data is from the SOCAT data set. So this is just for the summer, and the summer here is the average from January to March. So we do not believe that this behavior is because of the change in the main phytoplankton group here, because it's not likely that the phytoplankton group will be changed for the whole summer. But episodically, in some week or some days when we go to there and take the sample, for example. And another important thing that we I would like to highlight here from this paper is that is, as we can see, very different behavior, very different condition. So we split it here on the top, the years of the strong CO2 sink condition and the near equilibrium condition. This is the spatial variability of the CO2 fluxes on the top, and we can see very clear that the magnitude of the CO2 fluxes from different conditions is very clear. And another important here is that when we split this year into strong sink and near equilibrium condition, we also see significant difference in the meltwater input. So we have higher meltwater input during the strong sink CO2 condition, just for the summer. And as more meltwater input we have to the sea surface, we have a more stratified water column, upper water column, and the shallower mixed layer depth. And this probably leads to a favorable environment to the phytoplankton growth. So this is what we can see here on the right, where we have the chlorophyll A concentration for both conditions, and when we have strong CO2 sink condition, we have a higher concentration of chlorophyll A, and therefore high CO2 uptake. And another analysis that was carried out in this paper, very interesting, was we compare the CO2 fluxes of different regions around the Antarctica with respect to the area. So when we compare the regions such as the Galaxy Strait with this region with a smaller area, with the nearby regions with the larger area, like the Bransfield Strait, for example, Weddell Sea, Ross Sea, we quite see a pattern of the CO2 sink in the coastal regions. The smaller coastal region is proportionally stronger than the areas with the larger areas, such as the Weddell Sea and Ross Sea, for example. This is very important because this region is important to the CO2 sink around the Antarctica as a whole. But all of this information, as I said before, is just for the summer. So when I finished this study, several questions bubbled up in our heads. For example, what about the winter? What happens in the winter and during the other seasons along the year? And what about the net annual fluxes? So we know that during the summer, this region is very important to CO2 sink, but we don't know the net effect of the CO2 fluxes in an average year. And what about the season drivers? What drives the seasonal variability? And one question that remains to us is the Northern Antarctic Peninsula, especially the Galaxy Strait, really sinking more CO2? Because one thing that I forgot to say here, but I will say now, that from 2012, we identified the intensification in the CO2 uptake because the cycles of the variability is intensified to 2 years. So recently, you have more years with the strong CO2 sinking that we saw after the 2012. And so because of these questions, we developed another study published in the Scientific Reports in 2020 as well, and described the seasonal variability of the CO2 fluxes in this region. So in this figure here, we have also this. And also, just to remind the negative value is the CO2 sink, and the positive value is the CO2 source. And each black circle here is the average for each month from 2002 and 2017. And what we can see here is that there is an intense seasonal variability, and this variability is summarized here in this inset, in the right top inset, where we have the CO2 fluxes as well, and the sea ice cover in the bars, the blue bars. And what we identified here was that during the most of the year, for 8 months of the year, actually the region released CO2 from the sea surface to the atmosphere. And during only 4 months, from the December to March, the region uptakes CO2 from the atmosphere. But the amount of CO2 released during the 8 months is quite similar to the amount of CO2 taken up in only 4 months. And this is very important because this reveal the sensitivity of this region for the CO2 fluxes variability and the climate change, for example. And another important here is that in this case, we take in account the sea ice cover to calculate the CO2 fluxes. And we can see here in this inset that even in the summer, the percentage of sea ice is about 30%. So this is very important because we take in account the sea ice cover from scaling the CO2 fluxes to the sea ice cover from a linear relationship. So when we have 100% of sea ice cover, we have no exchange of CO2 at all, and we are going to see later that is probably not the truth. And another important result from this figure here is that from the 2012 2011, we have observed more frequently the months of the strong CO2 sink. And by strong CO2 sink here, I'm talking about the CO2 fluxes negatively higher than the 12 millimole per square meter per day. That is the average for the whole time series. And so more recently, we have more months with the higher strong of the CO2 flux. This probably will have a consequence of the CO2 fluxes as our average and our average. And that's exactly what we can see here. In this figure, we have the annual average of the CO2 fluxes. And we observed that until 2009, the region was an annual source of CO2. So actually, the region released CO2 until 2009 as a net behavior throughout the year. But since 2010, the region changed the behavior to mainly the annual sink of CO2. This is definitely because we observed, actually, I will not show here, but a trend in the decrease in the PCO2 at the sea surface, and at the same time, an increase in the PCO2 at the atmosphere. So because of this difference, we have more CO2 sink in the recent years. We also describes the drivers of the PCO2 change, the seasonal change in the PCO2, by the very known approach that is actually to convert the difference in each parameters into the unity of the PCO2, that is the microatmosphere. And what this figure here is shown is the difference in black bar, the difference of the PCO2 from between the seasons. So, for example, the difference between the autumn and the summer, and the same for the whole driver. So the drivers that I'm talking about here is the total alkalinity in the green bars, sea surface salinity in blue bars, dissolved inorganic carbon in orange, and in the red, the sea surface temperature. And in the purple is the era of this analysis, the uncertainty. And what we can see here very clear is that the main drivers of the PCO2 change is the total dissolved inorganic carbon, and the second driver is the total alkalinity. Temperature have an influence as well, but not so much when we remove the temperature effect by normalize the PCO2 to the temperature effect, for example. But okay, we see that the main drivers of the PCO2 change throughout the year among the seasons is the total alkalinity and the total in the dissolved inorganic carbon. But what processes control the changes in these two parameters is what we can see here. So by this diagram, we can see the relationship, the scatter actually, of the total alkalinity and dissolved inorganic carbon, both normalized by the salinity to remove the effect of the dilution, for example. And what we can see clear is that during the summer, it's very difficult to decouple the processes. The main process, so probably all the processes acted together to change the PCO2, to change the total alkalinity and dissolved inorganic carbon, probably. But in general, when we see the slope of this distribution, we can see that the slope is more it's almost similar to the slope expected to the exchange related to the photosynthesis and the respiration. So probably all processes act together to change their total alkalinity and dissolved inorganic carbon, and therefore PCO2, but photosynthesis and respiration, probably photosynthesis due to the phytoplankton growth, have a very important role in controlling the carbonate system in this region during the summer. And we can see more clear this during the spring, because during the spring we have completely different scenario environment in the beginning of the spring, when we compare to the later spring, for example, to December. So this figure here in the D subplot, we have the same for the whole, but the interesting thing here is that we can see when we have higher temperature, sea surface temperature, that means probably the data, probably no, but the data from the December, we have behavior more likely explained by the photosynthesis processes controlling total alkalinity and dissolved inorganic carbon. But in the beginning of the spring, when we have a lower temperature, we have other processes such as the ice growth, for example, and the dilution or calcification processes. Well, in this figure, we have the we summarize these processes that we can identify by the data and another by the literature that is carried out in this region. And so we have a region with the high nutrients, so the nutrients definitely not a problem in here. And we have during this late spring and during the summer, we have a melting of both sea ice and the continental shelves, for example, and both sea ice and continental shelf melting drive the more stable water column and the lower mixed layer depth. And this is a very good environment for the phytoplankton growth and the phytoplankton bloom, as we can observe from another studies. And this leads to the increase in the partial pressure of the CO2, the PCO2, and therefore the region behaving as a CO2 sink. We also identified, but this need to be further investigated, but we identified a signal of the decrease in the dissolved inorganic carbon related to the sea ice melt as well. On the other hand, during the autumn and the winter, we have more influence of the CDW intrusions and the CDW upwells to the sea surface. So we have more dissolved inorganic carbon to the sea surface, increasing PCO2 directly. And we have a deeper mid-sea layer depth that implies the more mixing along the water column. We also have light limitation to limiting the phytoplankton growth. And all of this condition increases the PCO2 in the sea surface, and therefore the region releases CO2 to the atmosphere. And we also have some signals of the increasing of the inorganic carbon due to the sea ice growth as well. Well, as I said before, we take in account the sea ice cover essentially by this piece here in this equation, where we consider the proportion of the sea ice cover in this equation for the CO2 fluxes calculation. But in this excellent piece of work in Frontiers for Young Minds, they describe very well the processes that can happen inside the sea ice. This is not for the Antarctica, it's for the Arctic, but definitely happen in Antarctica as well. And here on the right, we can see, for example, the phytoplankton growth inside the sea ice, for example, the diatoms, that is very important to the taking up CO2. We have identification of the calcium carbonate during the sea ice precipitation of the calcium carbonate and the CO2 bubble. So these three processes or conditions definitely influence the CO2 fluxes. So what I'm put this here is that we definitely need to better scale CO2, the CO2 fluxes for the sea ice, because I do not believe that this directly and linear scale kept all of the influence, this process is influenced inside the sea ice, even when we have 100% of the sea ice cover, for example. And now we have some work in preparation. This is a very preliminary results from a colleague here, where I'm collaborate with, and where we are trying to describe the biogeochemical not provinces, but the biogeochemical regions along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula in terms of the CO2 fluxes, is what processes drive the difference among these regions. So, for example, on the top left, we have the map of the Northern Antarctic Peninsula, and we have many data along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula in different regions. And what we can see from now is that all of the regions along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula is strongly influenced by the non-thermal effect on the PCO2. So the changes in the PCO2 is more likely to be affected by the non-thermal effect, except for this region here on the oceanic weather, that the influence of temperature is higher than the non-thermal effect. And in the figure below, on the down on the bottom left, we have a very interesting plot here that is the concentrations of the chlorophyll layer, the total chlorophyll layer, and the proportion by colors on the bars is the proportion of each phytoplankton groups. And for example, we can see that even when we have a higher concentration of total chlorophyll layer in the Galaxy Strait, for example, the G here, and we have, but we have more, this chlorophyll layer is dominated by the cryptophytes, for example. We have less influence on the reduction in the PCO2 than we compare, for example, to the continental weather, that is this region here in the Antarctic Sound. We have less concentrations of the total chlorophyll layer, but almost 100% of this chlorophyll layer is composed by diatom, and we have a higher reduction in the PCO2. So this is very important because we can see here this different from the region, but we also have the same station with different time, with different phytoplankton group and different behavior in the PCO2. So probably the main driver of the PCO2 in terms of the biology activity, the photosynthesis, is driven by the composition of the phytoplankton group. Well, and we can see on the right figure the same plot, the diagram of the dissolved inorganic carbon total alkalinity, both normalized by the sea surface salinity. And what we can see that, in fact, indeed, all regions except for the ocean weather is quite similar to the distribution expected by when we have an intense photosynthesis and respiration processes controlling these both parameters. Well, to summarize, what I would like to highlight here is that in terms of the interannual variability, we have a strong interannual variability in the summer CO2 sea surface CO2 fluxes, a huge interannual variability that is likely driven by the circumpolar deep water intrusions that brings more dissolved inorganic carbon to the sea surface. And at least in the Galaxy Strait, we have completely different behavior conditions, one with a strong CO2 sink behavior and another one with the near equilibrium conditions, probably driven by the CDW intrusions. And in terms of the seasonal variability, we have a very marked seasonal variability that is driven by the CDW intrusions, mainly during the winter, in the autumn, and the phytoplankton growth mainly during the late spring and during the summer. Yeah, but as I said before, the amount of the magnitude of the CO2 uptake during the summer, during the only 4 months, is about the same or very similar to the amount of the CO2 released throughout the most part of the year, throughout the 8 months of the year. And the effect of sea ice cover and in different groups of phytoplankton on the CO2 fluxes are still poorly understood. We are trying to decouple the influence of the phytoplankton group along the Northern Antarctic Peninsula, but we do need to care about the scale of the CO2 fluxes for the sea ice. And finally, but not least, I would like to acknowledge the whole platforms of data that make available. Most of this data actually came from the SOCAT dataset and GLODAP dataset and the Brazilian Highlights to Oceanography dataset. Actually, all of the results came from this data. So the I would like to thank you for the providers of these data and the supporters of this platform to make this available and to make us able to do a great and exciting science. So thank you very much. If you have any question, please let me know. And if you have, actually, as I said before, I highlighted just 2 works that was developed during my master's degree and my PhD, but we have more works and very piece of works actually carried out by our groups, and we can see more here in our website or on our profile on the X now. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.